This car differs from other cars in many features.
$1.85 million.
Hey everybody, it's Preston Tucker Speed Shop here again today. My name is Mike Tucker. This is Sean Tucker. We are Preston Tucker's great-grandsons. In a previous video, we had talked a lot about this test chassis and specifically the 589 cubic inch engine that was in it. So this was the first design of the Tucker engine, and by late 1947, say November timeframe, they still hadn't figured out how to make it run correctly. It wasn't making enough power. They had a very hard time getting it started because of the compression that each cylinder made all at the same time. So they needed an engine for a 1948 model year car. Thus, they had to figure something out. So they ended up working with a company called Air-Cooled Motors, found out their motor would work, and Preston Tucker bought the company, and Sean will take it from there.
So we're going to take a look at kind of the air-cooled version of the Franklin engine that they converted. So this is what it would have looked like in its helicopter configuration. So you can see it's standing vertical. It's also air-cooled still, so you can see the fins on the cylinders, and you got the big fan on the front side here. But what they did know is because it was used in aircraft, it number one had to be light, right? So this engine is 100% aluminum cylinder block, aluminum cylinder heads, and lots of use of aluminum alloy on the engine itself. In this configuration, it's dry sump. They ended up making it wet sump when they used it in the Tucker. And they also even, the bigger changes, they converted it to water cooled. So all of the configuration of the air cool here had to get changed somehow to water cooled. And how they did that was they had a kind of skunkwork team of engineers that went back to Preston's hometown and machine shop called Ypsilanti Machine and Tool, and converted it to a water-cooled engine. And we're gonna see literally the exact engine they did that on here in just a second. So we're gonna walk across the room here to Tucker engine number one. So this is the engine that they worked on to convert from air-cooled to water-cooled. This was done in literally 3 months. So all this casting work and crazy stuff you can imagine to go from that engine we just saw to this one happened literally in 3 months. And they drove it to the factory and installed it into a car, literally I think the same day or the next day. So pretty crazy timing. But they did get some things wrong in that time. So a couple things, the water pump is hard piped into the block. So with expansion and contraction and harmonics and things, that just didn't work. These ended up failing, so that changes later on. In the aircraft configuration, they did not have a harmonic damper. On later Tucker engines, you'll see a harmonic damper. The fan actually spins the wrong way, so it's pulling air over the engine where it should be pushing it back through the radiator. And some kind of other more obvious things is like the oil filler tube. You can see this engine has one in the back and one in the front. This was the original configuration. The problem is when you install this into a car, this hit the firewall, so you couldn't actually get the cap off or fill it. Some of the other differences, the early Tucker engine used a distributor that's actually shared with Hudson. This changes later on to a Tucker specific design. And this exhaust configuration is something that is also unique to the first Tucker engine. So it's the only one we've seen, at least, that has these two separate mufflers. The original intention that Tucker was trying to do was to have an individual tailpipe for each cylinder. And the idea was that if you had a problem with your engine, it would be simple enough to put your hand down and just see which engine or cylinder wasn't firing, so you could diagnose what the problem was. So they did end up getting away from that, and the production version of the Tucker actually has a single muffler, but that was the idea at least. So we're gonna head now across the gallery here to kind of the faux engine production line here, and Mike's gonna talk a little bit more about the engines they have over there.
Yeah, and one of the big advantages we have here at the AACA is just the size of the collection, right? So not only did Dave acquire the test chassis and the first engine, but several other early engines and several other engines in general. So we're going to start over here on the far end. So after Tucker number one, this is another early prototype engine. You'll see that the fan on this engine is still the wrong direction. And several of the other items tell us that these are early versions of this engine. You will see on this one that they had determined the issue with the water pump, and they've got some separation there. But so this engine was kind of the next version as they were trying to figure out what to do. This next one here in line is a very special one. So if you look at it, and those that know anything about engines, you can see these fins would tell you that this is an air-cooled engine. So although we don't believe this engine was ever delivered to the factory, we've got some documentation from the corporation that shows this particular engine, which is engine number 60, was never received. So we believe all this work was done at Air-Cooled Motors in Syracuse, New York, and never installed in a car, but certainly intended to eventually go into one in this configuration. It is a bit interesting also that this is engine number 60. You would think maybe they would have tried air cooling first and then abandoned that and gone to water cooling, but this engine of the 98 that they built is kind of 2/3 of the way through almost. So a little bit of an interesting tidbit. We don't know a whole lot about the history of this one in particular, but it certainly exists here.
Yeah, well, there's a couple other, like, if you look at it, you could clearly tell it's like there's some odd things, right? You've got the carburetor up here, but the piping going all the way kind of underneath. So in the helicopter, it was both the intake and exhaust were on the same side, where in a Tucker, the intake ends up on top. So you've got this kind of, I suspect that this configuration of the intake would not have worked so well as far as getting fuel down and going up into the cylinder, but they certainly were trying to make something like this work. So it's pretty interesting that it still exists.
So this engine here, this next one, is another very special engine. It's the engine that came from Tucker number 42. Now, Tucker number 42 had a couple of very unique things, or has a couple of very unique things. One, it was one of the 2 original cars that had the Tuckermatic transmission installed, and this transmission that you're seeing here is the Tuckermatic. So this was, we believe, what they called the R3 version of that transmission. So this Tucker number 42 and Tucker number 26 were the only 2 cars that had that transmission installed. Unfortunately, Tucker 42 no longer exists. There's a lot of stories about where it ended up and what may have happened to it, but there's enough parts of that car around that we don't believe it's going to show up as the missing Tucker. Maybe someday, but most likely not.
Well, and another thing to note kind of on the transmission as you're looking at that, the thing on the back there is a torque converter. It's exactly what it looks like. It's actually one of 2, right? So would have been a torque converter in here and also one on the back. The design of it is fairly interesting. I mean, this is pretty early in the design of automatic transmissions. It had a forward and a reverse, and that's it, and a neutral. But it's pretty creative, I guess, way to do it. And certainly, you don't see. I don't know of any automatic transmissions necessarily that have 2 torque converters. But it's a very simple design. So it was said to have only 27 total parts. So again, the idea being simplicity.
So this next engine here, you can see, as Sean was talking about, there's a torque converter inside of the bell housing here, or what you would call the bell housing. This is what that torque converter would look like. This next engine shows that. This engine isn't, as the run of Tucker engines go, this is getting very close to what we would consider a production Tucker engine. So as we move down the line here to the next one, this one is another special engine because it belonged to a car that also no longer exists. So this is the engine from Tucker number 18. Tucker number 18 was in a pretty serious car accident, we believe, up in New York way back in, I think, the 1950s. And ultimately doesn't exist. Now again, there's enough parts of this car around where we're pretty sure, well, we're very sure on this one that it's not going to show up because the majority of the car is still known, including the drivetrain. You will see a Tucker Y1 transmission here. So this was say a modified version of the Cord, but Tucker had his own design because the Cord transmission ultimately wouldn't have worked for various reasons. Lastly here, this last engine, we have another early Tucker prototype engine. This is Tucker engine number 7. You can see it's missing a few pieces here. The middle section where the carb would mount, the bell housing and things like that. But again, just amazing that Dave was able to find this stuff and not only collect it, but then make sure his legacy lived on by being able to share it here at the AACA. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed looking at all these different engines. Certainly, we'd like to encourage you very much to come and visit the AACA here in Hershey, Pennsylvania. This amazing collection is here for everyone to see, and And if you can make the trip, it's absolutely worth it, even if you're just a little bit of a Tucker fan. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe to our channel, Preston Tucker's Speed Shop. We are Preston Tucker LLC on Facebook, and we've also got Instagram accounts under our names, Sean Tucker and Mike Tucker. And with that, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time on our next video.